Give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. You can have all of this world. And give me Jesus.
Well, in my neighborhood, there is an abandoned golf course that used to be there. I don't know how many years it's been shut down, but they've left the golf cart trails there, and they've built up all these different subdivisions around it, and sometimes the carts just kind of go off, and I have discovered on one side of it, when I first moved into that neighborhood, and I like to run, so I got out and I decided I'm going to try to follow one of these paths. I don't know where it's going to go. I'm just going to go on this old golf cart path. And so I started out on it, and like I don't know about this place, but it used to be a really nice golf course because there's like an old abandoned wooden bridge, and it looked kind of shaky, you know, and I was looking at it and I thought, I don't know if that's going to stand up or not, but you know, I'll try it anyway. And so off I went and across the bridge, and I came around, and I thought, I feel like this is going places that I don't even know where I'm going to end up. And pretty soon it got to a point where I was like, I couldn't figure out if I was going to head back toward where I started. It just kind of wound around, and it left me wondering where I was headed. And in fact, on the other side of this same golf course, or abandoned golf course, the trails would lead. And one day I was running a long run. This was back when a couple of years ago when I was pretty in a good rhythm, and I was trying to do a 10-mile run on a Saturday morning, and I was going and I was running, and I was on my way back, and I got to this point where I saw the golf cart trail go off in that direction, and I thought, I've never been that way. I wonder if it would lead me back, right? So I started off on that, and here's the deal. When you run that many miles, you're not really interested in just adding extra miles to your run. And I started going, and pretty soon I began to figure out, this isn't going where I thought it was going. And I had to turn around and come back and find my way back to where I was. And I was thinking about that this week. I was thinking about how we use those metaphors a lot about life, right? A journey, a path, the places that we go in our lives, and how a lot of times it's when we look back at where we've been in our life, and we can see that we've been on a journey, that there's been places, choices that we've made, decisions that we've made that have affected where we are now. You know, I think back on, like, when I was a kid, I was thinking, what would it have been like if my parents hadn't moved to that one town, and I didn't go to elementary school there? What would have happened if I hadn't gone to Trevecca Nazarene University or gone somewhere else? Where would my life been? Or what would have happened if I didn't go to that cafe that day where I met Becky, my wife? I'd be without her, and that'd be pretty sad. What would have happened? Where would have life taken me? The journey. I happen to believe that we have a large amount of possibilities of where our lives can go, right? Where we can go in our lives. I believe that there are good choices and bad choices. But ultimately, when we're honest about it, we all know that our life will always end up, there will come a day where life is on a trajectory headed somewhere. Time doesn't stop moving. And at some point, you and I are going to continue to move forward on some kind of path. And eventually, we will all come to the end of life. Some of us, it might be sooner than we expect. Some of us might have the chance and the opportunity to live a full and complete life. But for all of us, we will have to face the great enemy of life itself, death. And unfortunately, sometimes death sure does feel like it's winning in the world around us, doesn't it? And death comes in different forms, really. The death of dreams, the death of relationships, sometimes even the death of our hope. Which is why last week we talked about this I am statement, this authentic Jesus that we've been in this series talking about. And we explored when Jesus said the I am statement, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. We looked at the story of one of Jesus' best friends, Lazarus, how Jesus called Lazarus out of the grave, how Jesus spoke life back into a very dead body of Lazarus. And the whole point was for those who were there, particularly of the Jewish people, the Jewish faith, that Jesus was trying to get them to see he was their Messiah, the great king that God had finally sent into the world to save the world, who was like Moses and would free them from their oppressors, who was like Elijah and would speak on behalf of God and do incredible miracles, who was like the great shepherd King David, who would know his people intimately. Only Jesus was desperately trying to get them to see that what he offered was so much more than what was just found in this life. That not only did he perform these signs that we were meant to point toward who he was, like healing a blind man who had been born from birth, but not only from physical blindness, but also to heal the spiritual blindness that had so blinded many of the religious people and leaders. And they couldn't even see the Messiah. Like raising Lazarus from the dead and revealing that not only would there be a day of resurrection in the future, right? Not only would that happen, but that actually that future hope of new life, that future hope can happen to a life of a person thought to be far gone, too far away from God, too messed up, too tangled up and wrapped up by the ugly mess of sin and shame and guilt. That kind of person can be resurrected by the power of Jesus Christ, because who Jesus actually is, his very being, is the resurrection power that can transform any life at any time. That's what he was saying. That is what he can do. And the transformation that he brings is an eternal encounter. We go from living in the stuck realm where death looks like it has the power over our lives, where it looks like we have no hope, where it looks like we have to stay prisoners to our confusion. Oh, prisoners to our confusion. Anybody ever felt like that? Now, that's a really good way for us to begin to talk about this week's I am statement that Jesus says, found in the New Testament book of John in chapter 14. Jesus is speaking with his disciples, and you want to talk about confusion. There's a lot of confusion what they're experiencing. This is what he says to them in John chapter 14, starting in verse 1. You can follow the screens, or if you have your Bibles or electronic device, let's pick it up. John 14, verse 1. Jesus says, "Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me. There is more than enough room in my Father's house, in my Father's home. If this were not so, would I have told you that I am going to prepare a place for you? When everything is ready, I will come and get you so that you will always be with me where I am. And you know the way to where I am going." Oh, Thomas. "No, we don't know, Lord," Thomas said, one of his disciples. "We have no idea where you are going, so how can we know the way?" And Jesus told him, would you read this with me? "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me." There's our statement for today. Jesus continues, "If you had really known me, you would know who my Father is. From now on, you do know him and have seen him." Another disciple, Philip, said, "Lord, show us the Father, and we'll be satisfied." Jesus replied, "Have I been with you all this time, Philip? And yet you still don't know who I am. Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. So why are you asking me to show him to you? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I speak are not my own, but my Father who lives in me does his work through me. Just believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. Or at least believe because of the work you have seen me do." Man, these two disciples, Thomas and Philip, it sounds like they've got some confusion, doesn't it? Right? Jesus says, "You know the way." Thomas says, "No, we don't." Jesus says, "You know the Father." Philip says, "Jesus, can you show us the Father?" Here are these disciples who have been with him for 3 years, and they're still confused. Here they are after seeing him heal a blind man, after they saw him raise Lazarus from the dead. I mean, what in the world, right? Come on. You and I would believe if we were there, right? But let's actually take a moment and put ourselves in their shoes. Some background here. See, when Jesus healed Lazarus, it kind of kicked things up a notch. The heat went to a whole new level because there were a lot of people who saw what Jesus had done by raising Lazarus from the dead. And word got back to the Pharisees, the religious leaders in that area and in Jerusalem, and they got very concerned. They got very concerned that there would be a major uprising, right? And that the mighty empire of Rome would come in and destroy all of them because of Jesus. In fact, one of the religious leaders even prophesied that it was better for one man to die than the whole nation. And so this pressure goes to a whole new level and it begins to mount. And it's like a powder keg that's about to blow. One side are these religious leaders concerned about Rome. On the other side, you have the people beginning to believe in Jesus. And they're beginning to believe he is this king, the king they have in mind at least, this Messiah. And then you have Jesus and his followers kind of in the middle. That's funny. You ever felt like you're in the middle? And all this is taking place a few days before this major festival called Passover is about to happen. And right before this scripture that we just read here in John 14, things get kind of dark. Jesus knows that the time is getting close for his death. It didn't take a rocket scientist to see the pressure, to see things that were beginning to change all around him. He knows that one of his disciples, and he had a pretty good idea that it was Judas, had sold his soul. He knows that Peter is going to basically stab him in the back as a friend, denying him at some point. And yet while they're at this dinner, before all this takes place, with all this pressure around them, with knowing that some of his friends were going to turn on him, Jesus takes a moment and washes his disciples' feet. He becomes their servant. And it's awkward. Peter, one of the top disciples, one of the leaders in the group, I would imagine, says to Jesus, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this?" And Jesus is emotional, and it's an intense pressure that he's experiencing. I was thinking about how Jesus must have been in this moment of intense pressure leading up to this scripture we read today, thinking about all that's supposed to take place. looking at the guys that have been with him who are still in so much confusion and thinking, oh man, how in the world is this going to happen? These guys, these people are all over the map. And everything he's just shared with them, one of them is going to betray him. The other one's going to deny him. That he's going to have to die and be lifted up. That's a lot to dump on some people, right? He must have wondered and felt like this is a bit much for me. So Jesus tries again to prepare them. But this time Jesus meets them right in their confusion, right in the midst of the cloudiness and the fogginess and the unknown. And he says to them, guys, don't be overwhelmed by your fear. Don't be overwhelmed when it looks so hopeless. The first part of the scripture in John 14 is something that is used quite often at funerals. It's meant to be comforting words when a loved one in faith it has passed away. But there are a couple of ways at looking at these words of Jesus in John 14. Many times people have thought that it was about some kind of house that Jesus has built for us in some faraway, distant place. And just like the resurrection, it could be seen as if it is talking about a future time when Jesus returns for everyone. But the word for that, for rooms here, is really best translated as a dwelling place. A dwelling place. What Jesus is talking about really here could also be seen as such a deep relationship with God. Such a deep relationship with God. A trust that what Jesus has been talking about all along, his connection to God, trust, Jesus says, trust in God, trust also in me. And in this moment, he is telling them that when he dies, when it seems like he is not here, and all these things go down, and he's lifted up on the cross, when he is put in the grave, when they feel like their dreams have died, when they feel like death has a hold on what they had hoped for and loved, trust. That this thing that is happening, these changes that are occurring all around them, Jesus wants them to remember to hang on, because all that God has in store for them, there will be plenty of room for them to experience it. I'm going to say that one more time. I want you to grasp it. Jesus is telling them that all that God has in store for them, there will be plenty of room for them to experience it. And there will be plenty of room for all those who will open their hearts and minds to Jesus. Aren't you glad about that? And I think Jesus must have thought that they were grasping it, right? Because he says to them, you know the way. You know the way. Now, have you ever been completely lost before? When Becky and I were dating, she was finishing up her last semester about 6 hours away from where I lived. And we decided we'd have one of those weekends where let me say this. Her brother, one of her brothers, was a student at Olivet Nazarene University. And where I was up in the northwest corner of Illinois, and where she was in the middle of the state of Indiana, Olivet was kind of like in Chicago, in that area of Chicago, and it was kind of like in the middle. And so we decided that all of her family and I and her would meet up at Olivet for a weekend just to get together. Well, her and I got to Olivet a little bit earlier before the rest of the family, and I love the city of Chicago. I love going in and seeing Lakeshore Drive and seeing all the buildings, and I enjoyed being in the city there. And so I took Becky, and I thought, let's just drive in and we'll drive back out. Just drive in and see the buildings and drive back out. It'll be that easy. That simple. Well, for some reason, I took a wrong turn off of Lakeshore Drive, which runs right by Michigan, Lake Michigan there. And I ended up in I don't know where I was, Chicago area. And I couldn't find an on-ramp to the interstate. So we just kept driving and driving. And all I could think of was, her dad is going to kill me. Her dad is going to kill me because I'm going to get us lost and we're never getting out of this place. I began to panic. I needed a way out. I needed some way to get out of the dilemma that I was in. And I was thinking about this week. You know what would have made that better? Is if I had somebody with us who knew their way around the back roads and the different places of Chicago to get me back on the right place to go. They would have been able to show me. Because they would have known the way. See, Jesus is telling them that in order to get the life that God has for them, in order for them to come out of their spiritual blindness, and guess what? What's ahead of them? The things they're about to experience, it's going to be a dark, dark place. When Peter ends up denying Jesus, you know it's going to be the lowest point of his life. Listen, if you want to know where the path is that will lead you through this painful life, through the brokenness and the hurt, if you want to know how to find the truth about who you are and why you exist, if you want to know a life that will endure and become eternal, look to Jesus. Jesus is the way through this painful life, and he understands pain. He endured it. I think too many people think that they can somehow magically escape pain. But I want to tell you something. If you've lived any amount of time on this planet, it's not if, it's when. And Jesus has shown us that he offers us a way. And the way leads us where we can be deeply connected to the God of all creation, who loves us and knows us and hurts with us. And the way that Jesus offers us to know God like this, the way he does it, is with his very life. By offering his life, Jesus offers to protect our faith and our connection to God. And the truth that Jesus will reveal to us will show us how we can know God. Revealing the things in our lives that we need his help with, things that are confusing us and where we are hurting others, things that are not pleasing to God because they are selfish and keeping us from loving others, things that we need to ask for forgiveness for, things that are causing shame and guilt and becoming self-destructive. I heard a guy this week, I loved what he said. He said, Jesus forgives our flaws and heals our wounds. And I believe that. I believe Jesus wants to do a work in our lives to transform us from being prisoners of the sin that feeds our flaws. But here's the deal. What Jesus was saying to them, his disciples, he is asking them to believe that he is who he says he is. One of my favorite preachers is a guy named Brian Zahn, and he has this phrase that's really been growing on me lately. He says, Jesus is what God looks like. Think about that. Jesus is what God looks like. That stuck with me while I was putting this together this week. See, Jesus is telling his disciples to believe that he is, that everything they have heard him say, that everything they have seen him do, that everything he has been able to do has been because he and God the Father are so intricately connected. And when Philip, his disciple, says, Jesus, show us the Father, Jesus says, if you have seen me, you've seen the Father. Jesus is what God looks like. See, for the Jewish people, the way to God, what they had come to believe and think, was through following a bunch of rules, what's called the law. They began to think that the law was the way. You had to try your hardest and do all these things and jump through all these hoops. And Jesus wasn't saying that the law given to them by Moses had no value, but he was showing them that what this law lived out looks like is him. That to love God with all your being and to love your neighbor as yourself is exactly Jesus embodied. So Jesus is the way to having this life that is a full connection with God the Father. And Jesus has so much grace. I love this part too. Jesus has so much grace here. I've never really thought about this here in verse 11. Jesus isn't afraid of their doubt. I love that part of the song we sang in the very first song, that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Bring your doubts with you. If you can't believe what he says, believe because of the signs that you've seen. Jesus gets it. He knows how hard it is sometimes to believe. But here's what Jesus does. Here's what can happen when we do believe. We're going to pick it up in verse 12. Jesus says, I tell you the truth. Anyone who believes in me will do the same works I have done and even greater works, because I am going to be with the Father. You can ask for anything in my name and I will do it, so that the Son can bring glory to the Father. Yes, ask me for anything in my name and I will do it. Jesus is telling them, I know this is going to look bad and ugly, but it's a good thing that I am going away. See, again, it's easy for us to look back and see this. We can read about it. We know what happens in a few weeks. We know, right? We know. But this idea of doing greater works, in that moment, none of those disciples could even begin to get their mind around this. That they could even imagine that one day billions of people would become followers of Jesus. Think about that. 12 guys who are confused about what Jesus is saying, everything that's about to happen to Jesus, and you would think that it was over. And here we are. We can look back and see billions of people who are now following Jesus. I think sometimes even today, when we read the news or we hear the polls or the surveys, we can get real discouraged. But here's the truth. When the church, the followers of Jesus, embrace what it really means to believe in Jesus, we will do even greater works than what we read about in the Bible. Let me make it clear. The greater works that he talks about, the way we will know that it's really of Jesus is because it will bring glory and honor and focus on God, not on anything or anyone else. Now, I may not know exactly what that completely looks like, but I sure do want to be a part of it. The greater works. And that is how our lives can be signs that point toward Jesus, that point toward the way, the truth, and the life. I want to end with this quote from one of my friends, Jess Mittendorf. I've been also reading one of his books about these I am statements. I love what he says. He says, this is a life free from the tyranny of social acceptance or material accumulation. This is a life with hope. It is filled with the anticipation of what God has in store for us, because in Jesus, we have the very presence of the Father revealed to us. The very presence of God the Father revealed to us. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. Would you bow your heads? I want us to move into a time of reflection. Do you know the way? The way to a life that connects you to the Creator of all things. The way is Jesus. Do you know the truth? The truth that can set you free, that can give you direction and purpose. The truth about who Jesus really is. Do you have this life? A life that doesn't pretend like there's no pain, but a life that is on a firm foundation. A life that sees a God who sits in the pain with us. A God who has been beaten and gone to a cross. God who knows what pain feels like. And yet, one who can see past the pain to a hope that's not some distant, far away hope, a hope that we can have now in this life.